friends. Welcome back to the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast. So we have talked a lot about meat on this podcast. It just tends to be a topic that comes up a lot. It's really interesting to discuss. And more often than not, we're talking about meat and butchering and all of that in the realm of beef. I mean, obviously, I love beef. We raise beef, but I feel like there's another aspect of meat production, especially on a homestead level, that often kind of gets forgotten about in some circles, or at least in my circles. And so that is this topic of pork, especially pastured pork. And how can we raise pigs on our homestead in a sustainable way, in an ethical way, in a way that's better for them and better for us? And so I am so excited to have with me today Charles Mayfield. He is an expert in this realm. He is the founder of Farrow Skincare, the very first lard-based skincare company, which honestly, I had never heard of before. He emailed me, so I'm really excited to talk about that. But he also practices regenerative farming and has tons of experience in this world of raising pigs. So welcome, Charles. I'm so excited to have you.
Great to be here, Jill. Thank you.
Can you give us a little bit of background on your experience in the pig world, kind of where you got into it and your passion for it and how that all started?
Yeah, sure. So I've got a little bit of background in nutrition through the cookbook lens. I got really into paleo. I've co-authored a number of cookbooks in the space. Love your cookbook, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And those are hard to put together, so I'm always very respectful of those that have gone and done it. But yeah, paleo got into the paleo scene back in like 2008, 9, 10. And that community, after arguing over protein, carbs, and fat for a few years, started to really point the needle towards food access, food sustainability. Ran across the likes of Joel Salatin, Polyphase Farms, the Weston A. Price Foundation, a number of wonderful voices in the space of not only regenerative ag but local high quality food. And in 2016, sort of decided to make the jump. I was living in Atlanta at the time, moved up. I'm from East Tennessee originally, and sort of moved back up here and got started. If you hear me talk about Salatin quite a bit, I am forever grateful to him and his family. They've been absurdly generous to me in my farming pursuits. And he's, for your listener, he's put out an absolute ton of fantastic content through his books. And so it was Pastured Poultry Profits and a number of other books, and started like so many do. I would say that my scale for pork and poultry and beef production was maybe a notch or two above homesteader scale, but certainly a micro scale. And yeah, just, you read and you read and you read, and then all of a sudden you realize I'm not going to learn much more reading. I got to sort of do the do. And ordered a handful of pigs, and I was hooked. It didn't take long for pigs to endear themselves to me. They're my favorite farm animal. And did that for 6 or 7 years. Pastured pork, poultry, beef. We did eggs as well, and a batch of turkeys every year. But yeah, I've really enjoyed working with pork. And I think you mentioned in the intro, pastured pork. There is no other kind of pork. I don't buy store-bought pork anymore. I don't. It's not good for you. And certainly we can get into the particulars there. But yeah, I've never been huge by any stretch, but I think the most pigs I've ever raised at one time was maybe 20, 25. Down to as few as 3 or 4.
And are you doing like are you shipping pork, or do you have local people who come pick up? How do you sell it?
Yeah, mostly we started off as a food drop, sort of a modification on a CSA, if you can imagine. So we had a buyer's club. People would make a deposit towards food. We didn't make it a specific towards a certain animal or certain anything like that. We basically gave them farm credit, which I think for even someone wanting to venture into homesteading or maybe scaling up just a little bit, makes a lot of sense. Bring your neighbors in and get them involved. But yeah, so we would do monthly food drops. I'm about 2.5 hours outside of Atlanta, and so a couple of metropolitan areas around. We would, we used Barn to Door as a sort of an online farming e-commerce platform, which I was tickled pink with. I didn't use them for the first year or two. I was doing everything on a spreadsheet, and man, collecting checks and all the fun things. So yeah, we would do that would be the bulk of our sales would be these food drops. And then locally, I'm in a small town in East Tennessee, so we had some local patrons that would come by and, sort of like they write down what they took, and every month I'd go in and reconcile things. So.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So I would love to get into what you said about pastured pork being the only pork, and what are the health concerns around conventionally raised pork? Why is that something you don't buy? Let's get into that meaty stuff. No pun intended.
Yeah, sure. No, I love chewing the fat about meat, if you will.
There you go.
Yeah, so pigs, and this is an interesting segue if we have a chance to talk about Farrow toward the end. But pigs and humans are so biologically identical. It's rather hilarious. We train our surgeons on them. We use their organs inside our bodies. There's a whole host of things in terms of the connection and symmetry between humans and pigs. And so I always ask, if you raised a human in an enclosed environment with no sun and gave them crap to eat, they would be very unhealthy very quickly. And that constitutes about 98% of the pork production in this country. Pigs metabolize, as an example, the fat on a pig, a pastured pig, the subcutaneous fat stores vitamin D, just like with humans. And, a pastured pig will have arguably higher vitamin D content in its fat than any other mammalian species that we eat. It's, a pastured pig that has plenty of access to the sun because they metabolize it the same way. They need fresh air. Pigs like to root. This is one of their natural God-given abilities. And so denying them that just adds stress to their life. And then again, just like if you took a human population and put them in a factory environment, you're elbow to elbow with all your best friends and can't go to the bathroom anywhere other than where you're standing. At some point, if the person on the other side of the human house or the pig house gets sick, well, that's going to run rampant through your indoor facility. And so a lot of the industrial pork is fed garbage, absolutely garbage. And they're monogastric animals, not to get too deep in the how our GI system works, but the way they metabolize food is very different than a ruminant species like a goat or a sheep or a cow. And so it's way more direct in terms of the toxicity or lack of nutrients in an omnivore monogastric animal than, say, a cow.
Sure. That makes sense.
So they're fed garbage in an environment where they don't get sunlight. Again, you deny a human being sunlight for the entirety of their life, and they will be sick and not worth much. And so we put them out on pasture. We don't. Movement is another big thing. Animals intuitively move. And you also don't want them to build up too much. You don't want them standing in their own poop, right? Yeah. So right. Poop is manure is an asset and can be a liability. And just like pit, they're very destructive. For your homesteaders that are out there, this is not, well, you'll know this. You build a chicken coop. Chickens are omnivores, monogastric omnivores. You build a chicken coop and you don't move it. And in 3 months' time, you have a moonscape because they have eaten everything new that grew out of the ground. And pigs, albeit a different type of destruction, are that destructive. So, yep.
Yeah. We have raised pigs a number of times, usually every other year, every 3 years. And it's tricky. We've got our chicken operation down to a science. I use that term loosely because there's always room for improvement. And we do good with our cattle, but the pigs, I'm always like, ugh, I just feel like we could do so much better. And they are so destructive. I remember one year they got out and we had one of those swimming pools like that you buy at Walmart, and it has the big sides. It's like an adult can get in, and they rooted around the base of the swimming pool and like collapsed the swimming pool, and it was epic. And my husband was like, no more pigs. Anyway, so I get it.
Well, can I ask you some questions then?
Yes.
Are you using any electric fencing, or was it a physical barrier?
They were physical barriers, and it was cattle fencing. And we since have learned that doesn't work. So we put hog panels inside of our pens, but I don't want to get ahead of myself because I have my own personal questions about pasturing in my environment. Cause I know like back East, you have trees, right? and
we have a few
and woods. You have a few trees. I do not. I have literally a few. But it's just a different environment. But I guess let's start off by, what does your pig operation look like? Or if, in a perfect world, what would be the perfect way to raise a pig? Perfect, using that term loosely again, but your ideal way to raise a pig.
Well, let's start with an obvious answer. The good news about pigs is they're very resilient, very smart, and highly adaptive to multiple climates. So whether you're in Wyoming or East Tennessee or up north or way down south, they don't like, I would say the further or the closer you get to the equator, the more you've got to pay attention to your pigs. As with most animals can handle cold a lot better than they can hot. The ideal pig situation. Well, first and foremost, let's keep this at maybe the homesteader level, shall we?
Yes.
Yeah, that seems appropriate. Okay, so first and foremost, I would say at a homesteader level, you're talking about seasonally raising pigs. So one batch a year, right? And if you're going to time it right, in my opinion, if you time it right, then you're harvesting your pigs in the late fall, early winter before it gets too terribly cold. Your average, I'm going to say heritage breed or any variant cross of breeds. We worked with old spots and red wattles predominantly, and occasionally, occasionally worked with some large blacks. These are just 3 breeds. Your listener can look those up. Now, the large blacks took a little longer to finish, candidly. They were about a 9-month from birth to market weight. Okay. Depending on a couple factors, but the males tend to finish a little sooner than the females in any breed, especially if you don't cut them. If you keep their sexual organs intact, they'll just grow faster. And so, generally speaking, 7 to 9 months is your from birth to market weight, which for us was close to around 300 pounds live weight. So it's a seasonal thing, and pigs like companions. So when I talk about raising pigs, even at a homesteader level, don't get 1 pig. You can get 2. This gets into maybe bringing your neighbors in on the fun, getting them to underwrite some of the costs. But pigs are social animals. There is a lot of work involved with pig. It's not a lot of work every day, but it's work every single day. And so, your time is valuable. Why not spread that time over 2 or 3 or 4 animals? And so, the pastured setting, shade seems to be a concern of yours. Pigs are incredibly hard on anything you try to make yourself. I tried making my own waterers. I tried making my own feeders. As you've experienced, pigs are hard on stuff. And so when it comes to water and feed, I would strongly recommend, Osborne makes a great little feeder that's, holds maybe 250, 300 pounds. I think it's called their R2. And zero waste. The way these pig feeders work is you waste literally no feed, which is fantastic. There's a couple of field drinkers out there. This is another reason why you seasonally sort of cut it off in the winter. You don't have to worry about water freezing or anything like that. And we fed, just to get into feed, we fed a non-GMO ration. It was a fresh milled ration. Now I would supplement that as needed be with, I think Tucker Milling is a non-GMO pelletized feed manufacturer. I think they're out of South Alabama, but they ship, I don't know if they're nationwide, but they're ubiquitous around here. You can find them at Tractor Supplies. You can find them at a lot of feed stores. And then you can also check into your your local co-op or hardware store, or whatever the case may be. So this is one of the things about pigs, and for your listeners and you know this, you need to feed pigs. They're omnivorous. And, if you want to go get a cooney, they're a little bit smaller. They're more of a grazing pig, but you still got to feed pigs. They're not a grazing animal. And, fortunately, any scratch, they're sort of like chickens in this regard. Anything that comes out of your kitchen that you don't want, a pig will find a use for it. But we generally fed our pigs. This also helps with them finishing on time, getting to that market weight. And electric fencing. Okay. This is the most critical piece. I mentioned how smart pigs are. Highly intelligent creatures, which is an asset when it comes to an electric fence is a psychological barrier. It is not a physical barrier. If you've ever seen, for your listeners and you, Premier One Supply is where I get all, and they have a super wonderful pig fence. They've got a couple of different options. I don't think you need anything other than their lowest grade. I think it's an 18-inch tall pig netting.
Oh, okay.
And
so we got their taller chicken netting. Could that work as well to do double duty, or do you need is it specifically for pigs?
That is a fantastic question. I do not recommend poultry netting for pigs. And here's why. And you know this. Poultry netting rides the ground and it's loose and wavy. So one of the advantage, one of the tricks to poultry netting is that the chicken cannot see through and focus its eyes beyond the fence because it's wavy and moves around. The problem with that is a chicken fence, to protect the chickens, doesn't need to be too hot, in terms of the voltage going through it, right? Yeah. And so if it grounds here and there, it's okay. A pig fence needs to be hot. And I would say bare minimum, 3,000 or 4,000, volts running through that. I can't remember if it's volts or watts or whatever, I get lost in all that, but we would use a SpeedRite 6,000, Energizer, and, anything you're using for cows from an Energizer standpoint, you can repurpose for pigs. But the point is, the wire never touches the ground. So there's no grounding at all. So you're getting sort of a full charge distribution through that wiring. And the good news is it doesn't take but one or two times of them touching that wire, and they've learned their lesson. And they sense the electric. I mean, they know exactly where that fence is, right? This is back to the smart animal. So, which is a good point to bring up. Most feeder pigs, I've only met one in my tenure that trained the piglets. So, you've got a farrower over here and they have piglets, and generally they're weaned at 6 to 8 weeks. And so you're getting this, 2-month-old piglet. If they're not trained to electric fence, that is job number one. And so you can put them in I think you mentioned hog panels or cattle panels. You can put them you can have a welcoming corral for your new piglets, right? Enough space for them to run around and eat and do their thing for, a week's time. But over in one corner, set up a single wire, make it hotter than the dickens, and then dump some acorns or corn or kitchen scraps on the other side of that wire and just let them learn, we don't mess with this. And so, yes, that's job number one, train them to electric fence. Once you've done that, then it's twofold. Your pigs need to see you effectively every day, or someone every day. We don't want a branch coming down on your. You don't want the water going out. You don't want the feed running out. You don't want the line, the electricity going out. So you're checking on them every day. So you really do develop and they know exactly who you are, and but you want to move them around and keep them in that electric fencing. I would use in a pastured setting. You got to be a little careful with pasture because pigs will root. I really love them on the edges of pasture, and again, for your listeners, if you've got wood lots, you're good to go. But yeah, a couple of pigs. We'll just keep it at 2 to 3 pigs. They're going to take up, oh gosh, less than 1/10 of an acre for maybe a week. So what we would do, I'll just tell you, what we would do is they sell this pig fencing in 100-foot sections. And so I would buy 7 sections. And so I make a big square or some amoeba looking, right? Yeah. But then you've got the next paddock. So you've got 4 nets for the current paddock plus 3 more nets to latch on to the next paddock. And so you're just sort of hop, skipping, and jumping from one paddock to the next. And so that's sort of all you need and you can use a deep cycle battery on these energizers. You can get a solar energizer, which again, if you're going to do this seasonally, check your calendar, make sure you got enough sunlight depending on where you live to charge a solar energizer, but they work great as well. Okay.
That makes sense. And that way you're not risking, because I have tried herding pigs before and it is not an easy feat. So that way I'm just picturing your configuration. So you're just pulling out the middle section, scooting them over, and then you're rearranging your panels. That seems pretty slick.
Yes. And hungry pigs are motivated pigs. Again, this everyday contact, this everyday exposure is a really important thing. You bring them a couple treats every now and then, but we would use that. I think it was the R2, this Osborne, gravity drop feeder, and you're monitoring the feeder. Well, if they've been in this paddock for say 5 days, and I would typically, you need to move your pigs at least weekly, okay, depending on weather and all that fun stuff. Sometimes it's 8 or 9 days, sometimes it's 3, 4 or 5, but you're generally planning on a weekly move, okay. And depending on how many pigs you got, so a pig is going to eat between 4 and 5 pounds of food a day. Okay. And so you do your math, right? I got 3 pigs. That's 15 pounds a day. I got a week ahead. So that's 105 pounds of feed. So you get 2 50-pound bags of feed. You dump them in your feeder. And if they're through that feed in 5 days, then maybe bring them a snack, maybe let them root a little bit, earn their keep, but you let them get hungry. Okay. And then your feeder's really light. So you just drag it to the next paddock and I tell you what works great. What works great is a metal bucket or a plastic bucket with a little bit of corn in it. And every time you go see those pigs, you shake that bucket, make a little noise, here pig, and you toss a couple kernels of corn out. Those pigs will go anywhere you want them to go after about a month.
Okay. And yeah, they are, like you said, they're smart. So they're figuring out the cues pretty quickly.
Just like training a dog.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple questions. You mentioned your ration, like your pelletized ration or whatever you're getting. Is that just your typical like corn, wheat? Is that just going to have those ingredients in it? Or do you have any ingredients that you try to look for or avoid in those sorts of pre-mixed rations?
I would say draw the line starting at GMO versus non-GMO. Okay. And again, this is one of the advantages to pigs is they are omnivorous, so they could sort of survive and in fact thrive on a variety of ratios between protein and carbs and fat. And so I would say make sure you're using a non-GMO feed. If you want to go a step further than that, ideally I would probably take the soy out of the feed first. Okay. There are those that'll tell you no corn, no soy, no this, no that. I don't subscribe to that per se. I think once it's a non-GMO, that gets us, it's like balancing your checkbook to the penny. You can
Yes.
spend 10 hours balancing it to the penny, or you can get it to the nearest dollar in about 30 minutes. So, yeah, so preferentially non-GMO. Below that, I would say try to avoid soy.
Okay.
And then beyond that, I couldn't speak to it. But
Okay. Do you think it's possible, because I've heard people dance with this idea, is it possible, like on a homestead scale, let's say someone has 2 to 3 pigs, could you raise a pig maybe a little slower than commercially to butchering weight in a reasonable amount of time, only on like kitchen scraps and just random scrap grain? Or are you really going to need that pelletized ration or some sort of ration to get you to weight at a reasonable amount of time?
well, the first answer to your question is I don't know, because I have never tried to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
But digging a little deeper into that, if you had a family of 12, then maybe the food scraps are more.
Yeah.
But it's a good question, because you can also check around to your local area. If you've got a local brewer or distiller, or even a local, it's hard to do this with grocery stores now, because there's certain, depending on your state and local laws, they can't throw away food. But I would also add to that, I would add a warning of not all food from the grocery store you would eat. So you shouldn't necessarily be feeding that to your pigs. But, can it be done, Jill? The beauty of pigs is yes. I think you could do it. It depends on your acreage. You could, if you had a ton of acreage and could let those pigs work hard for their food. If you had a ton of, hardwoods, lots of oak, lots of acorns, various things, is it possible? Absolutely. But then again, you get into the balance. Okay, well, is it going to take us 12 months? Now we're getting into winter, water's freezing. There's a properly fed pig will finish in 7 to 9 months at a weight of 250 to 325 pounds, which is, at the end of the day, our goal is to put meat in the cooler, so to speak, and also avoid as many headaches as possible. And so this is one of the balancing acts with pigs, because you do have to feed them. And so it's not necessarily an ideal homesteading animal for everyone, but I would certainly enjoy trying to do it with enough land and enough forage and just scraps out of the kitchen.
Yeah. I think it's going to be one of those things. As much as I want to like make it into a formula, I think it's going to be something that people have to like you said, what kind of land do you have? What kind of resources do you have? Do you have a brewery in your area where you could get spent grains? Like, it's going to be a case by case situation where it might work beautifully for someone like me. It's a little bit trickier just with where I live and what I have available. But I think people could get creative potentially depending on their situation. So if anyone's listening and you figured it out, like, let me know.
I can give you a creative idea. Because we tried this. Now, again, it doesn't sound like it would work in your area, but if you're in a part of the world that has a lot of oaks and a lot of acorns, especially near a city center, then and if you've got kids, this is a great fun project for kids. A year in advance or a fall in advance of your pig project, you start collecting acorns and you put it out in the neighborhood. We'll pay. We'll do something. We'll give you some bacon. You invite people to participate. We've got several neighborhoods around here where the acorns are a problem because they accumulate, they get down on the road, and you can literally go by with a flathead shovel and fill buckets of these, and they'll keep for a fairly substantial amount of time. So for the cost of a couple of super sacks or some plastic bins or something like that, you could, in theory, build up, a ton or half a ton worth of acorns, and your pigs will love you forever for that. So you can plan ahead in certain circumstances to acquire most of your feed locally and naturally.
I like that idea. I also cannot imagine having acorns on the road because we have no acorns here, but a cool problem to have that ends up, creating a neat feed source. So I like that idea. Hey friends, I'm just interrupting this episode for a second to give a shout out to our other sponsor, the Modern Homesteading Conference. So this is really exciting because up until now, all the big homestead conferences and events mostly happened on the East Coast. And that meant if you live out west, then you're either driving a long ways, you're flying a long ways, and that just makes things a lot more complicated when you have animals and gardens and all the things as we do. However, that is changing this year. So the Modern Homesteading Conference is a brand new event. It's going to be held in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It's live and it's 2 full days filled with your favorite homesteading experts like Joel Salatin, Homesteading Family, Melissa K. Norris, Anna of All Trades, Farmstead Meatsmith, and many, many more. I was looking at their website and it's a great lineup of speakers. So not only are you going to get all that valuable knowledge and the skill sets that are going to help you be more self-sufficient no matter where you live, but you also get the bonus opportunity to enjoy a concert by Grammy Award-winning farmer and filmmaker Rory Feek. I love Rory. He's been on my podcast. He visits our homestead every year. He's a dear friend. So that's a big treat. All the homestead knowledge by day and a concert with Rory at night. So classes will include raising a family milk cow, on-site live butchering and curing demos, like that's pretty darn cool, homestead income classes, 4-season gardening, cheese making, homeschooling, sustainable agriculture, and tons more. So don't miss out. Tickets are on sale now. Head on over to their website to see all that is included in the event and to save your ticket. The website is modernhomesteading.com. And now back to our episode. Okay, so I would love to hear your thoughts on the feasibility of raising pigs in a pastured setting where I live. Because I feel like whenever I picture pastured pigs, I think of Joel Salatin's setup and the pictures I've seen, and it is like pig heaven. I just picture the creeks and the trees, and it's this lush grass, and I'm like, that is the perfect place to raise pigs. And then I go outside to my pasture, we're high plains grassland. It's a very dry environment. We get grass coming up, in the spring, and once it gets eaten down, it doesn't really come back very well until the next year, right? It's just how we roll. We're buffalo country. We have buffalo here, and so I'm picturing putting pigs out there, and I'm thinking they'll just destroy it. Like they'll root it up, and it's all said and done. So, in your experience, is it feasible for someone like me in my climate to have them moving around my pasture with electric fence, or should I maybe stick with beef?
Well, there's a couple ways to go there. I would say they can definitely share the pasture. Okay. I wouldn't want pigs on your land before you've had the chance to graze it. If your grazing situation due to your arid climate is a one and done situation, or maybe a two and done situation, then you're going to have to be a little bit more strategic. Now, I will tell you, pigs are great, similar to chickens, but not quite as good, running behind your ruminants, right? Because they're going to go through that manure, checking for bugs and all sorts of things, just like a chicken will. And the grass is, it's beaten down from the grazing it just got. I don't have experience specifically with grazing in your climate. I can tell you another thing to consider might be ringing the pig's nose, or finding like a cooney is. I mentioned them specifically because they're more of a grazing pig. They've got a flat nose, and they don't do as much digging as they do chewing. But and it's also time. If you're willing to, if you got a system and you're willing to get those pigs moved from one spot to another, in 2 or 3 days time, they're not going to destroy much. I'm not saying they're not going to root, because that's what pigs do. But the thing you want to try to avoid, Jill, is if there is something 2 feet down under the ground that pig smells and it wants it and it's there for a week, it's going to go get it.
Yeah.
If you've got a low spot that gets really, really wet, it's
Yep.
it's going to be a mud puddle
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
in very short order. And so the only thing I would tell you in your climate with your is to make sure, and you can build one of these, just a really low to the ground type shade structure.
Okay.
Again, with a couple pigs, you think about like a wheelbarrow size thing. I mean, you don't need much, but shade is going to be important for them.
Sure. Yeah, because it's hot. I mean, we're high plains, we're high elevation, and that sun's brutal in the summer. So that would make sense. Something mobile that we could move around. Okay. This is giving me more of an idea than I thought was possible. So this is good. We might just have to be creative. So.
Well, and so follow me here. This is the stuff I love to do. So in your climate, if you can get your hands on an old like silage wagon chassis or something like that, something you could pull with a 4-wheeler. Okay, so it's heavy, but it's low to the ground. In theory, you could put a water tote on top of that thing, right? And some shade, and even a storage bin for your feed, so you're not hauling feed out to the pigs every week or something like that. But you could house a bunch of stuff up high. When I say up high, I'm talking like 3 feet off the ground on the top of that silage wagon chassis. Gravity feeds some water into your waterer, and then you just roll out there, hook it up to a 4-wheeler, and pull it to the next. I promise you, they'll follow you. So you sort of self-contain everything, all in one. It needs to be heavy duty because the pigs will rub up against it and do what pigs do. So the wheelbarrow analogy probably wasn't the best one, but yeah, it's doable.
Okay. I like that having the water tote there, because that's the other question. My husband and I go around and around, because everyone we know, or a lot of the people we know doing regenerative stuff, are back east, right? In Tennessee or in Virginia or in these places that are beautiful and lush. And we also don't have live water very often here. Live water is a luxury. So, I love Joel, especially when he's like, well, just dig a pond, just put in a pond. And I'm like, but Joel, that doesn't work here. We could dig a pond and there would be nothing in it. So, we have to get creative with our water. So being able to fill a tote and haul it out with a 4-wheeler and then water that way is also a good, helpful idea, because we can't run lines as easily, and the hydrants are a long ways away from the end of the pasture.
Well, yeah, and you're talking about like a tenth or even a quarter of an acre for your pigs.
Okay.
Right, and so again, back to this, we got a couple. I don't. How much land do you guys have?
We have 67 acres here around our homestead, and we lease. We have our beef herd. We lease ground down the road, so that's where all the big herd is. But we just have our homestead animals just here on 60-ish acres. So.
Yeah, so just making this about you for a second, that'll help your listener too. So 2 pigs, they'll need a tenth of an acre at most, but go ahead and give them a 1/4 acre, right? Give them a 1/4 acre for a week, or give them whatever. Let's see, what is that? 100 feet by 100 feet, so 1,000. Wow, it's been a while since I've done the math on that. Anyway. Give them let's just say you give them a 1/4 acre. You can come back to that 1/4 acre if you need to in about 10 weeks.
Okay.
Now I'm giving you estimates because your climate's different than mine. Sure. But over here we can come back in about 10 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks. And so you could, in theory, contain your porcine exploits into 1/4 acre times 10. Right, so 2.5 acres.
That's not much. I mean, that's doable. That's not much.
Yep. And then the thing I would add to that is, and this is just an interesting play with pigs, is running them along the fence line, or your fence lines, or if you've got any tree lines or anything like that, running them along stuff where you might want them to sort of disturb it a little bit, like under fence lines and things like that. I got to a point where, so the electric netting, the pig netting that you're certainly familiar with, I would run the netting, and then I would run a single line under or through permanent fencing, like a 3-strand, 4-strand barbed wire fence. I'd run a single line low under the fence and connect it on the other side. So the pigs, if they needed to or wanted to, they could get under the permanent fence, but then there was a stopgap of fence on the other side. But what you'll find is they'll dig around underneath that fence. Oftentimes that's the least tended to ground. So there's some interesting things that they may explore in there. So that's something to think about.
That's a good idea, because we do have barbed wire on the perimeter, and I have learned pigs don't care about barbed wire. They pretend like it's not there. So we could just fence right around it and it'd be great. So, okay, this is so good, because I did not think this was a possibility. I just thought, well, I don't have woods, so I'm up a creek. But I'm sensing possibility here, so I like it. How do you have any formulas or ways for people to figure how many pigs they would need to feed a family if they're looking at adding pigs to their homestead this year?
Yep. So I don't know that I have formulas, but a 300-pound market weight pig is going to yield you, we'll make the math conservative and easy. It's going to yield you roughly 200-pound hang weight. Okay. Now, in a homestead setting, we're assuming then that you're the one dispatching on the one bad day. Obviously, you can take it to a processor, but and I recommend folks if they're going to do this, that they should participate directly in the one bad day. So. And then the next factor is, do you have a meat grinder and various other tools that allow you to sort of turn, big bulky cuts into more manageable cuts? But yeah, you'll net anywhere from 125 to 150 pounds of finished meat from a 300-pound market weight pig. So I'll let those numbers drive the math formula for all of your listeners. How many are you feeding and how often? Now, the one caveat there is that I'm not including is all of the additional probably back fat. Because again, I'm talking about finished meat products, which your pork chops will have a fat cap on them. Your hams will have your belly, that'll have some fat on it, but yeah, you'd probably get another 10 or 15 pounds of just pure back fat off of a carcass that big. And of course, you render that, turn it into lard, and now you're cooking the rest of your food with it. So the only thing you can't use on a pig is the squeal, they say.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how useful they are. Do you have a breed? I know you mentioned several breeds. If that is like kind of your go-to homestead recommendation in terms of breeds?
Well, I have direct experience with large blacks, with red wattles and old spots. If I were going to start a homestead tomorrow, especially if I'm in maybe the colder climates, I would consider maybe a Mangalitsa. Although I hear, because I've never run Mangalitsas, I hear they take a little longer. So again, this is back to your situation. If you're going to do this on the seasonal front, then I would maybe stay away from Mangalitsas. And again, if you're not carrying this animal through the winter, we're not worried about how hairy they are or not hairy they are. But those are the three breeds that I'm most familiar with. Now, you've got your Durocs, you've got your Berkshires. Berkshire's another one I've heard great things about. I've never run them myself. A lot of pig selection, Jill, is phenotype versus looks. So you think torpedoes like the large blacks, and I want to say the mule foots to some degree, and maybe even the Berkshires are a little bit more torpedo-like, which is think long, big bellies. And then your old spots, your red wattles, your Durocs, these are more squattier fire hydrants, and you're going to get a bigger ham. And again, in the homesteading situation, I would point, I don't think you can go wrong with most breeds.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, because I know I've looked in the past for some of the more heritage breeds locally, and it was pretty tough for us to find here. So I think it probably just depends on the area and what you can get Would you say
Yeah.
that getting a conventional breed and feeding it well, pasturing it, is still better than not raising pork at all?
Oh, I would say that, sure.
Okay.
Um, they haven't bred the pig out of the pig.
Okay.
They've bred a lot out of the pig.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of conventional, what are the light pink hairless pigs. I
Yeah.
don't see many of those, but I would say that they would respond well in a pastured environment because they haven't bred the pig out of the pig.
Okay.
The problem's not the pig, the problem's the environment, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does make sense. Yes, so we can definitely affect that change on our homesteads when we're talking about environment.
Yes, and if one of your
Yeah.
listeners does that and reports into you, I want to hear about it.
I will pass it along for sure. We'll start our own little pig case study here.
There we go.
Okay, so this is the question I'm dying to ask you. The elephant in the room for some. Occasionally, not all the time, but more often than you'd think, when I'm in like whole food circles, like people who are eating healthy and mindful about their diets and such, there is some hate around pork. There is people who are, cognizant of what they're eating, and they're like, you know what, I love grass-finished beef, I love pasture poultry, but I don't do pork. It's not healthy. It's trash meat. And I never know what to say to that. So I'd love your thoughts on that topic.
Well, around these parts, we have a saying, bless your heart. And you can always just respond with bless your heart.
Yes.
So no, there's actually some real history behind this. So a lot of it starts with a lot of the religious texts, and candidly, you know this, you never see pork tartare on the menu, right? Okay, you never see chicken tartare on the menu, and this gets back to our earlier conversations. Monogastric omnivores metabolize things differently, and they store things, and how they're fat and everything are different. And so from a evolutionary perspective, if you ate undercooked pork, okay, or mollusks, you see the bottom feeders, right? A lot of these, if you ate these things 1,000 years ago and they weren't cooked properly, you were dead. So in the context of religious writings and stories and folklore, telling a story of safety and species perpetuation, you would find a good reason to say, don't eat this animal, because we didn't know what trichinosis was a long time ago. You can eat raw beef, you can eat raw lamb, you can eat raw goat. Now, if it's been sitting around for a while, it's going to not smell so good, right? So there's a rancidity that comes along to tell you, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat that. But raw pork can carry things in it, doesn't always, but can carry things in it where if it's not cooked properly, you're getting sick. And so I don't, no more than I'd want to talk a Hasidic Jew out of accepting Christ as his Savior. I try to stay away from these arguments. And again, bless your heart, you eat what you want to eat, fair enough. Yeah. But I understand the hesitation in eating pork, because hell, there's people that tell you not to eat meat, right? And they're
sure
they've got their food is religion. Jill, you know this as well as anybody.
Amen.
And
yes,
so
it is.
This is my answer to you to address the elephant in the room. I do think there's a problem with pork if it's raised in an industrial house. I wouldn't eat that, and I would make sure that you're doing everything you can to either properly cook your pork, or, and this is, we haven't talked about this, but also properly cure your pork, because that is the homesteading advantage as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you a quick story. So about 4.5 years ago, because I'm growing pigs and I'm growing them to sell as meat, and I had this bottleneck situation come along where I think it was 5 pigs scheduled to go to market, go to the butcher, and I only had like 2 of them sold. And so I had to make some real fast decisions. And so one of the decisions, I would normally take the hams and grind them up. That's our sausage and ground pork. And so I'm very fortunate to live near Benton Country Smoked Ham. If you're not familiar with Benton, you can look them up, Alan Benton. And so I took these pigs to the butcher. And you also have to, if you're going to cure hams, especially, the skin has to be on. So maybe we hop back on about scalding and scraping lessons and stuff like that. I'd love to come back on again. This has been
absolutely.
an absolute pleasure. And so, but you scald and scrape so that you can leave the skin on. But I requested the hams and the shoulders from 3 of these pigs whole, right? Just, I'll come get them whole. The pork chops you can cut up. It's not a problem for me to sell those, but I can't handle all this ground pork and sausage in my freezers right now. And I took all those, it was 6 hams and 6 shoulders, because it was 2 from each animal, to Alan, and he cured them, country salt cured them, smoked them, and gave them back to me in 6 months. Okay. That was 4.5 years ago, Jill.
Yeah.
This December, I've had to move around a few times, and these hams have hung in basements and barns. I mean, they've lived the rock star life for the last 3 or 4 years. And we were having a New Year's Day party, and I thought, man, I'm going to pull this thing. I was covered in mold, because that's what happens to country ham. Covered in mold, white vinegar and water, scrape that thing off. I thought it would be rotten. I mean, I don't know any better. This piece of meat's been hanging for 4 years. It was the most delectable prosciutto I've ever eaten in my life. Every bit of the meat on that thing. So from a homesteading perspective, you raise them seasonally. Take a ham, salt it, smoke it, hang it. You're building food reserves, for a rainy day. And
without a freezer. Like, you don't have to have a freezer, right? Like
no freezers.
Free.
Now again, just back to the seasonality of pork, right? What I would recommend is that you're without a freezer or HVAC, because when Alan Benton cures my hams for me, he's doing it in a temperature, climate controlled environment for that first few months, right?
Yes.
And so this is why historically hogs were raised in the summer and slaughtered in the fall, is because now you had this oncoming 3 to 4 to 5 months of cold weather. The salt does most of the work, but what you want to help it as much as you can. And so, but yeah, once that cure has set, I mean, they're good to go.
That's I do need to have you back on. Could we do another episode on like the ins and outs of curing and scalding and all of those things? Because I think that would be super helpful. I have dabbled, but I feel very insecure in my knowledge on those areas.
I'm a dabbler too, but I can speak from experience, but I'm not a pro by any stretch. But I have good books and some hands-on experience.
I bet you know more than I do. So I will tell you, I have a confession. Once upon a time, I had the book and I had a whole leg, and I did all the things, and I did a salt cure to make prosciutto, and I hung it in our unfinished basement, and it's cool down there and dark, right? It's kind of creepy because it's unfinished basement. I had this like leg wrapped in cheesecloth or whatever, and my husband was appalled because he's like, every time I bring a repairman down there, it looks like we're serial killers because there's body parts hanging from this basement. But anyway, I got scared. This is so sad. I got scared, and it had little, like, I think flies had burrowed in, and I didn't unwrap it, and I threw it away after a year, and I still feel horrible for doing that. And it probably was fine. So I've confessed my sins now, but I'd like to redeem myself at some point. So we will talk about that on a future episode.
You are, Jill, you are forgiven.
Thank you. I feel better. So
I listen, my grandfather, so my family's background is in the dairy business, and my grandfather, we had this Benton Country Smoked Ham right here in our backyard. And he came to sort of national prominence in the late 90s, early 2000s, but he's been around forever. And my grandfather, we were in the dairy business, and, you know, a lot of the dairy is sort of Northeast, dairy pricing set out of,
Yeah.
Pennsylvania and all these things. So he'd have these big clients and he'd send them a country ham. And sometimes by the time it would get up there, it would have some mold on it and they would just throw it away thinking it was bad. And, it's just,
yeah. When you
you
don't
don't
know,
know what you don't know.
No, I know. Oh, now we know. Know better, do better. So that's what we're doing. So,
so if that happens again, Jill, if it
Okay.
happens again, the only thing I'll tell you is when it's time to cut it open, you'll know if it's bad or not.
Okay. And
You'll
that's what I
know.
was unsure of. I'm like, is there botulism in this? And I won't know it. But this would be like your nose will tell you if it's bad.
That is my opinion of the things. I'm not a deep reader, and I've got plenty of experience in the curing and enjoyment side of this. But
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. There's so much when I think of what our ancestors did and mostly survived. I'm like, we get so nervous with food safety, and I appreciate food safety and I understand a lot of the rules, but I think we get really skittish. I'm talking about myself sometimes unnecessarily just because of, our modern sensibilities around food. So just that rethinking of what's normal and what's natural and what did our ancestors do and how was this done before refrigeration? So.
The swine is divine for that reason.
Yeah. It's amazing animals. So this time has gone extremely fast and it has been amazing. But before we jump off, I really, really want to talk to you about a topic. I don't think I've heard anyone else speak to this. Maybe I just live under a rock, but lard as skincare. I am very familiar with beef tallow as skincare. But when I first got an email from you, I'm like, oh my goodness, he's doing the lard thing. So talk to me about this. I know it's so good for your skin. Can you explain why we would want to use lard on our skin? Because I think some people might hear that and go, weird. Like, why am I putting fat on my face? And maybe talk through, is it different than beef tallow? Is it similar? Like, what's the scoop on that?
Sure. So, mentioned this earlier. Pigs are so biologically close to us that we train our surgeons on them and use pig parts in human bodies. So when we start getting into skincare, okay, so the three big things with skincare. Our skin is our second stomach. Okay, it's called that. A lot of people refer. It's our largest organ, and it eats things. If you've ever run up against a poison ivy bush, you realize very quickly that your skin consumes some oil that it might not have wanted to do, right? And so because of the biological mimicry with pigs, the lard's pH, so skincare, you've got pH needs to be a spot on match. We check that box. The lipid profile, okay, so the ratio of saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats within the fat, okay, is a determinant factor in sort of absorption and how much your skin will want to eat it, okay? And then the third thing is vitamins and minerals, right? And the trifecta in skincare is vitamins A, E, and D, okay? Well, for your listeners, pigs metabolize A, E, and D mechanistically the same way humans do. Pigs also take that stored or harvested metabolized vitamins and they store them in their subcutaneous fat, okay? Quick fat lesson. So lard is rendered back fat, belly fat from a pig, subcutaneous fat, okay? The tallow that is common, most common and ubiquitous in the world, tallow is rendered kidney fat from beef, okay? That is visceral fat. Okay, now I'm not here bemoaning tallow. I think it's great. We actually use tallow in our products. But we say here that the lard works in mysterious ways. It does for a number of reasons. One is because of the biological mimicry between pigs and humans. Okay, so your skin, your biology recognizes this fat as effectively its own. All right.
Okay.
there's a couple reasons why I think we don't see lard in skincare. And I'm the first guy in town. Lord, I've been to Weston A. Price Foundation conferences. I've been to no one's. It blows my mind that nobody thinks about this. But lard is pigs are tough, because if you don't raise a pig right, it's going to metabolize a poor environment just the same way it would metabolize a healthy environment. And because, Jill, it's subcutaneous fat, okay? Again, tallow is over here viscerally in beef. It almost doesn't matter what you feed beef. Like, you can raise a conventional beef, you can raise a grass-finished beef. The mineral content and the vitamins, which are great in tallow, are going to stay about the same. It's the subcutaneous fat. So for your listeners, you'll know this. You go to the store and you buy a store-bought steak, okay? Yeah. The fat on the ribeye is white. Yep. If you go buy a grass-finished steak, the fat on the ribeye is yellow. That is beta carotene, or the lack of beta carotene. And so what happens in an industrial feedlot with a cow is they're fed garbage, right? Effectively garbage that is devoid of beta carotene. And so for that last 2 or 3 months that it is being fattened up and finished in a feedlot, it is slowly drawing down on its beta carotene stores in its subcutaneous fat to survive. Okay. So I hope I'm making sense here, but subcutaneous fat versus visceral fat are just different fats. The beauty of the pig is, if you raise them right and you feed them right and they got plenty of sun, they're storing all of that proactively in their subcutaneous fat. Now we use, such a great, we use leaf lard. So leaf lard is the pig equivalent of tallow. So it's the visceral kidney fat. And if you look in your old homesteader books, anybody that's got one, a Firefox series or any of these old ones, leaf lard was prized for baking because it's visceral. So there's no storage component. So the pig's not storing acorn smell or any of this stuff. So leaf lard is odorless and colorless, and it does not impart that on your pie crust or your biscuits or anything that you're baking, right? Yes. We have a face food product and a skin food product, okay? I use more leaf lard in our face food product because it's up by your nose.
Okay.
Colorless and odorless within reason. I mean, we have a scented and an unscented product. We don't have an odorless product because it's animal fat. Yeah. But yes, I'm amazed by the day that no one sort of picked up on this. We're the first one in town. The lard does work in mysterious ways, and and I don't know what our time looks like today, but I could go on for hours, and so
yeah. So this is something that people can use as a face cream, as a body lotion, just like they would use any other lotions, and they're going to see the same. Like, what can they expect when they use this?
Sure. So a little goes a very long way. Similar to tallow. Again, your listeners may be familiar with tallow. Here's one thing they're gonna expect. So tallow, and again, we use some tallow in our product. Tallow at room temperature is hard, which is why you see it in a lot of balms and salves. Okay. Lard at room temperature is not. It's soft and very creamy. And so you open a jar of our stuff, you're not having to dig down in with your finger. Okay. A little goes an incredibly long way. We tell people, take a pea-sized, portion of our cream and start rubbing it into your skin. It will soak in almost immediately. Again, it depends on your climate and sort of how dry your skin is. But I mean, it's unbelievable. I haven't had razor burn in 2 years. I get emails about eczema, psoriasis, cheilitis. The origin story of Farrow, which is on our website, I got a really nasty sunburn, and in an act of desperation, sort of lathered up with some lard, and lo and behold, miracle. So it's highly effective. Again, aftershave, Lord, it's in my hair right now. I use it as sort of a pomade.
Yeah.
We've actually got our new product. I'll tell you is Epidermis is launching here in the next couple weeks for pre-order. I think it's live on our site now, and so yeah, we're the first lard game in town, and it's exciting. I'll tell you a funny story real quick. So my cousin, he's my dearest cousin in the world. He's sort of a junker antique guy, right? And he lives down in Georgia. They have this beautiful farm, and I go down and visit all the time. And his house is so amazing, like just all this old antique arts. I mean, he just has an amazing eye. And the last couple times I was down there, I noticed. So one of the things that they've collected over the years are old lard cans. Now, your listeners may not be familiar with this, but I'll tell you what they do know. Everyone knows about the can of popcorn that comes every Christmas, right? This big, tall, round. It's got 3 partitions. You got caramel, cheese, and regular popcorn. So something that big. Well, he's got lard cans from the turn of the century. Okay, so Jill, I want you to imagine going to the store in your downtown little village on the prairie, okay?
Yep.
And coming home with I'll send you a picture. They were selling cans of 50 pounds, 50-pound cans of lard. This was like, go to your local, store.
Yep.
And so, talk about why do we need so much skincare now? Every human being on the planet that didn't have a servant or maid 150 years ago was elbow deep in a can of lard, on the daily, on the daily. And if they weren't elbow deep in lard, they were elbow deep in the carcass of a deer or a pig or something that, either dad or brother or sister or somebody had brought this animal carcass home, right? It was time to turn that into food. And so, we were elbow deep and covered in visceral and subcutaneous animal fat for a very, very long time. And so anyway, I see these tins in his house. I mean, Lord, he's turned some of them into can lights. It's amazing. But we forget, this was the cooking fat that you went to the store to get at the turn of the century.
Yep. And now it's funny how it's been demonized so much, and I feel it's coming back around, but good old Ansel Keys. Thank you, Ansel Keys, for taking us away from the lard. That's a whole nother topic, but
bless his heart. Well, you know what? you actually, you got to blame Procter and Gamble. Ansel Keys came later. When I got in this skincare, so I spent 10 or 15 years in the nutrition paleo space, right? So I've always thought that Crisco was the first introduction of seed oils into our lexicon, into our world. Turns out it was actually soap and candles. That was where hydrogenated cottonseed oil came from. It was soap and candle. You would love this thread. It was soap and candles at the turn of the century. Okay. Procter and Gamble went all in on cottonseed because in the decade before there was this huge price fixing deal with the tallow and lard people. So Procter and Gamble's like, to hell with y'all. We're going to try and figure out how to make soap and candles out of cottonseed. And so they went all in. They bought all these cottonseed manufacturers in Texas. And what happens at the turn of the century? The light bulb. Now, all of a sudden, the prospects of candle sales don't look so good. They team up with a German scientist. They figure out how to hydrogenate cottonseed oil. Okay. And they bleach it white and market it as the greatest, newest, cheapest, best cooking oil. And they make it look like lard. I mean, you can go find these old ads. I never thought that it was actually the skincare, soap and stuff I never thought that soap was really where we got this garbage from, but that's the origin story.
That I did not know any of that. That is fascinating. I'm gonna have to go do some research now. That's fascinating. And now we think it's so normal. It's like, oh, who would use lard? That's barbaric. It's just funny how
so
fast we forget.
why lard? So I think tallow. Well, tallow is ubiquitous, right? We raise a lot. Raise and slaughter a lot of beef in this country, and it's visceral fat, so you can source it, and it's not going to be toxic. But tallow also, it sounds a little more je ne sais quoi. It's got a little bit more, oomph to it. Lard is lard, and by God, we are embracing it. We are for your listeners that don't know, our website is farrow.life, and there's pigs everywhere, and the Lard works in mysterious ways. So
you have the best slogans. I was very impressed with your branding. Top notch. Good job on your naming and your slogans. I thought it was super clever. So
thank you.
Oh my goodness. This has been amazing. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you have lots of things going on. Man, can you point people, you said farrow.life is your website address. Is that where they can shop for your products as well? Or is there somewhere else they should be looking?
No, we're just direct to consumer through our website. So e-commerce. Awesome. For your listeners, if you sign up for our email list, we send you a code to save 15% off your first order. So there's a little incentive there. And we're on Instagram and Twitter. There's links on our website. The website's really the best place to go to start. And again, at the homesteading level, there's videos out there of me making this stuff, showing people how to make it at home. The beauty of raising pigs on your homestead is you're going to have some amazing fat back and kidney fat to render down and cook with or turn into whatever you want. So it makes a hell of a soap.
For sure.
So,
yeah. Awesome. Okay, guys. So go to farrow.life, check out what Charles is doing, and then sign up for that email list, get 15% off. We're going to put all that info in the show notes as well. This has been so good. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And I feel very inspired to go have a conversation with my husband tonight about pigs. So wish me luck.
You're going to get me in trouble.
I'll be like, Charles said, we need to do it. Don't worry. I won't throw you under the bus. So.
Jill, it has truly been an honor, and I don't know that all your guests do this, but what you have done and built with your channel and all the information you put out is truly amazing. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. I would love to come back on and talk pigs more, and if the wind should blow me Wyoming's way, I would love to come by and see your 60 acres and meet the family.
Absolutely. We will definitely have you back on, and thank you for the kind words. And come on out anytime you're at Wyoming way. We will have you out for a milkshake at the soda fountain and give you a tour. So
love it.